Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently, who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start out tonight with Steve Sabol, who died recently at the age of 69. And it was Steve Sabol, along with his father Ed Sabol, who created NFL Films. And NFL Films was in part responsible for the emergence of pro football as America's most popular sport. All those films you see of guys making touchdowns in slow motion, of football spinning in the air, of kicks going end over end, of frigid stadiums where you can see players' breath and frenzied fans. Those are the work of Steve Sabol and his father. The NFL and pro football began increasing their popularity in the late 1950s and early 1960s. It started with the first televised championship game. In 1958, there was a famous championship game between the New York Giants and the Baltimore Colts that went into overtime that the Colts won on an Alan Amici run from the 2-yard line. And in 1960, Pete Rozelle took over as the commissioner of the NFL. And the three things that made the NFL popular over the next 2 decades were the emergence of television, because pro football seemed perfectly suited to television to gain popularity. Gambling, because gambling was such a large part of the NFL. And the films of Steve Sabol, because that was the thing that popularized the NFL in people's minds. And he was a great filmmaker. Sam Peckinpah, the director, got many of his ideas for The Wild Bunch from Steve Sabol. There was all that slow-mo stuff and the drama and the dramatic music composed by a guy named Sam Spence. In addition, Steve Sabol had the genius to use a man named John Facenda from Philadelphia, who was the voice of the NFL. He was often dubbed the voice of God with his deep voice. Here's a trailer on Steve Sabol and John Facenda. And that's Steve Sabol narrating.
NFL Films had come a long way from the days of wind-up Bell and Howell cameras and two-man crews. We now arrived at a game with a battalion of skilled personnel and cases full of the best camera and recording equipment that money can buy, all customized to our needs. We were young, yet experienced, energetic, but under control, and we attacked our job with a passion. And finally, we had found a voice that matched our imagination. I can still remember the first words that I wrote for John Facenda, and I remember tapping him on the shoulder, and the first words that he ever read for us were, "It starts with a whistle and ends with a gun." And I just remember thinking back and hearing that and knowing that, boy, we were onto something really different.
We're ready to go if you are.
Okay. John.
He read our scripts as if he were an after-dinner speaker at the Last Supper.
So can I use the word frightfully rather than frightingly? I'm going to have trouble with that.
Yeah, that's a tough word. Okay, that's fine because we still keep the alliteration.
And it's a good line, and I don't want to change it.
Okay, so it's frightfully instead of frighteningly.
I'm glad you said it.
Okay.
All right, now where else? Right from the very first.
We call John the voice of God.
One of the things you don't see mentioned much about Steve Sabol is that script writing he did. You know, he was very good at it, and he always bordered on the poetic and the cornball. Of course, his most famous phrase is the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field. And you think about that, and on one hand, it's an apt description, it's a memorable description, and on another hand, you see that people make fun of it all the time. It's sort of cornball. And that's the way Steve Sabol's scripts went. To give you a good example of that, here's a little bit that he wrote and performed on the rivalry between the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles.
For over 40 years, the Eagles and Cowboys have proven his point. There's been no brotherly love between these two franchises. In its early years, the Cowboys-Eagles rivalry was about as competitive as a hammer taking on a nail. Starting in 1967, Dallas won 21 of 23 games against Philadelphia. They also went to 5 Super Bowls during the 1970s. Meanwhile, like a bitter wine, Philadelphia's jealousy fermented in the dark cellars of pride and resentment. Today, another verse will be added to this history of hatred. As Lord Byron might have said, bring it on.
Metaphors, similes, allusions, and alliteration. I think you see my point. I'm going to close on Steve Sabol by reading some things that one of my favorite sports writers, a really nice guy and a great sports writer, Dan McGrath in Chicago, wrote. Here was a little bit of his take on Steve Sabol. Think about it. Before there was Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, fantasy football, or endless footage of the NFL on the ESPN shows, NFL Films and its various highlight packages were all a fan had to satisfy his or her cravings between Sunday. If America's appetite for football is insatiable, and it appears to be, Steve Sabol and NFL Films are at least partly responsible. Message and medium were a perfect fit. To Sabol, pro football was wondrous spectacle, pure theater, and he had the tools to tell its stories within that context. Majestically long, spiraling passes soaring through the air, jitterbugging runs unfolding in super slow motion over a thumping background of rousing military music, and the stentorian baritone of John Facenda delivering a dramatic narration from an impossibly overwrought script. The frozen tundra of Lambeau Field has been part of NFL lore since before Chris Berman was born. Football fans ate it up, the whole package. NFL Films became the most effective marketing tool in the history of sports, while its lone client became the #1 sports enterprise in the nation, if not the world. You couldn't say that any better than Dan McGrath, and you couldn't say that any better than Steve Sabol. We're going to close tonight with Tedi Thurman, who died recently at the age of 89, and she was radio's Miss Monitor. She delivered the weather on the most popular radio program of the 1950s and 60s, Monitor. Little perspective, Monitor was a program put together by NBC by a man named Pat Weaver, and it was sort of the radio version of the Today Show, which Pat Weaver also put together, and it was an eclectic show. It ran for 20 years on NBC with some of the most famous people in radio and later in television featured on it, and it was basically a news show with a lot of informative features. And Tedi Thurman delivered the weather all across the nation in this breathless, sexy voice. So I guess you could say she was basically the first sexy weather girl. Here is the introduction to the first broadcast of Monitor in 1955. As I said before, it ran for 20 years. It ran until 1975. It was NBC's attempt to keep radio popular and informative, which was later taken over, I guess, by public radio. But the closest thing to Monitor, in my opinion, is the BBC. It was sort of Pat Weaver and NBC's attempt to recreate the BBC. Here's the introduction to the first show. By the way, Pat Weaver, the president of NBC, was also the father of Sigourney Weaver, the actress. And in this broadcast, you'll also hear the name of Clifton Fadiman, whose daughter Ann Fadiman wrote the book that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down, about the cultural shift in medicine. You'll also hear Dave Garroway, who became the longtime host of the Today Show.
Monitor. 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 2000 hours Greenwich Mean Time. This is Monitor, reporting the nation and the world. The combined radio and television networks of the National Broadcasting Company bring you the premiere broadcast of Monitor, the new NBC radio service originating from NBC's Electronic Communication Center, Radio Central, New York. Now, to introduce Monitor to America, here is the president of the National Broadcasting Company, Mr. Sylvester L. Weaver.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Monitor, our new NBC weekend radio service. This is a preview, which will be seen on television for the next hour, and it'll be heard on radio until midnight tonight, New York time. But beginning next week, Monitor will start each Saturday morning at 8 o'clock New York time and run until midnight on Sunday. It will bring you a continuous flow of items of high interest and information. Monitor is for all of you, wherever you are, in your cars, at home, at the beach with your portables, everywhere. And on Monitor, we are going to throw away the radio clock. We are going to bring you what we hope is the radio pattern of the future. News and information and entertainment in the vignette form, where the items are as long as they need to be or as short. Well, over a weekend, there'll be a half 100 people serving you from Radio Central here. And among them, and here today for you to meet, are Dave Garroway and Bob and Ray, Morgan Beatty, Walter Kiernan, Clifton Fadiman, Ben Grauer, and many, many others.
What's first? Well, the top news headlines of this hour, and here is Dave Garroway.
And here are those headlines. From Bonn, West German Chancellor Adenauer is flying to Washington for talks with President Eisenhower. He is due there tomorrow. From Detroit, midnight strike deadline approaching as GM and officials of the United Auto Workers Union seek to settle their dispute. From Sumter, South Carolina, the Ku Klux Klan is out of hiding, holds its first open meeting in 3 years. And from Le Mans in France, the greatest auto tragedy in history, 85 dead in the crash at the sports car race at Le Mans, about 100 miles southwest of Paris.
So you get an idea of what Monitor was like. On the first anniversary of the show, again, it was very popular, ran every week, and people all over the country listened to it. Dave Garroway mentions Miss Monitor, Tedi Thurman.
Has it really been a year since Monitor first went on the air? 12 whole months? 52 whole Sunday nights? What is the significance of all this? We're all a year older, of course. You see, 6 times 52. Good heavens, I've introduced Miss Monitor 312 times. And if the folks in Atlanta don't know what the temperature is on Sunday nights, by this time, they just don't care.
What did Tedi Thurman sound like when she did the weather? Well, here's Ernie Kovacs, who was a frequent guest on Monitor, introducing her. In this clip, he's introducing her on his show, and so she's a little over the top, but you get an idea of what she sounded like on the actual Monitor broadcast. It's only a little bit more sexy than she did it on the actual broadcasts.
Actually, it isn't so much that there's an excess of sex and violence in these various media. It's really that there isn't quite enough. Now, if there were more, we wouldn't notice it so much. Now, let's take, for instance, the weather forecasts.
Hi, weather lovers. How about that sunshine today, Crazy. I don't know how to tell you this. We might have a little rain tonight. Old Pluvius is in there pitching. You see, we have this low pressure area. And we have this high pressure area. They just don't make the scene. Cuckoo. It was 78 in California today. 74 in New Jersey. 21. 21 in Alaska. And 108 in Georgia. Try to keep cool.
That Georgia thing is an in-joke. She always let off on Monitor with the temperature in Atlanta because she was originally Dorothy Thurman from Georgia. The other interesting thing about her, she always made the rounds on the television shows in New York City, especially Jack Paar. And she'd come on with this slinky black dress and black high heels, and she was really a gorgeous woman. And you'd have men fantasizing about her. She was an embodiment of female sexuality. The ironic thing, she was lesbian, which never came out in those days. You remember, we were talking about the 50s. So she was like Rock Hudson, the 50s embodiment of male sexuality, where it never came out he was gay. But in any event, Tedi Thurman was a memorable radio character for 2 decades. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I'd like to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. And as a final tribute to Tedi Thurman, as I said, her home state was Georgia. She always gave the Atlanta weather first on Monitor. So I'm going to play the most famous song ever written about Georgia. It was written by Hoagy Carmichael. Originally, it was a song about a girl named Georgia, Hoagy Carmichael's sister. But it became so popular that the state of Georgia made it its official state song. A lot of people have covered this song, but the greatest version, without question, is by a native Georgian, Ray Charles, and he made it #1 in the country in 1960 when Tedi Thurman was the Monitor girl. I have to believe that she loved this song. Here it is, classic song, classic performance by Ray Charles of Georgia on My Mind.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia,